been standing right here a little under 150 years ago. I'd have been the centre of a bustling community, houses as far as you can see in that direction, streets, children playing, a church, a community that represented much of rural Britain at the time. It wasn't affluent in many ways and often relied on various charities, but nevertheless a community that had been here in this very spot for over 800 years. And with the snap of a finger, this place was gone, literally abandoned overnight, leaving us what we see today, the imprints of the streets and the cottages, and our imagination to try and picture what this place would have looked like.
I've had a fascination with places that just vanish, places that we knew existed and couldn't find, places that change. And in this film I want to explore the very different ways a place can be lost. Not just what happened to them, but why. Because when places disappear, they don't just vanish from the landscape, they vanish from memory, from maps, and sometimes history itself.
Now, I've been to this place once before and I always said I'd come back because I really feel like places like this, specifically this place here, can teach us so much more about ourselves and society today than it can about the history of the place itself. And one of the first things you notice about this place, depending on which direction you approach from, is that there. That's an old water pump for this village. Now, it's a village or a small town, not a city, as per the title, and I make no apology for that because there's so much here that I feel that shouldn't be forgotten for many different reasons. Let me show you.
It's hard to imagine that now, looking back 150 years ago, there was a real living place there, an extremely poor existence, but nevertheless a real one. A small rural community that reflected much of Britain at the time, poor, labour-based and held together firmly by family ties that stretched back through centuries.
Families lived here because there was work to be done, seasonal maybe, but agricultural jobs on the fields around us now.
Parish and census records show the same surnames appearing again and again, generation after generation, suggesting continuity rather than growth.
Now, one fascinating thing for me though is the footprint of all the buildings that we're left with. I've been trying to find the chapel, and I think this building here could well be it.
In 1812, a local benefactor, Jane Bridgman, paid for the schooling of Snap for 16 children, and it tells us that families were still raising children here into the 19th century, and the village was considered worth sustaining, even if only just. But it also shows how fragile that support was. The decisive moment would come early in the 20th century.
In 1905, the land here at Snap, the surrounding environment, was purchased and converted from arable to pasture, sheep pasture in fact, which required far fewer workers than arable ever knew how to. And of course the entire reason for the existence of this village, this town, this community disappeared overnight.
Henry Wilson, a butcher from just down in Ramsbury, a couple of miles away, was said to be the butcher of Snap, completely responsible for its demise.
Now, Snap didn't die because of disease or disaster or war. It died simply because after 800 years of an existence here, a community here, the work just stopped. Now, regardless of its size, Snap was really important for me to include in this video. I feel like there's a message here somewhere. I'm not exactly sure what it is yet, and I'm not here to preach, but 800 years of a way of life here was gone overnight because of a change in the way we live, the change in technologies, and I think we're at a very significant time of change right now with developing technologies. And again, I'm not here to preach. I don't know what the end result is, but I think there's a message here for us in the overall picture. Food for thought at the very least.
Sat on the east coast of Britain lies a fascinating landscape for so many reasons. Along this stretch of the Suffolk coast, there is very little to suggest that anything extraordinary once stood here. The shoreline feels empty, but for centuries it was the site of a major English town. It was a population, a city with communities, people, churches, houses, streets. It was a population large enough to rival some of England's largest medieval ports. The roots of Dunwich is important, may reach back even further than its medieval peak. In the 7th century, the Anglo-Saxon historian Bede describes a place called Dunwich, founded in the year 630 as a seat of the first bishop of the East Angles. For generations, Dunwich was identified with Dunwich, placing this coastline at the heart heart of the Anglo-Saxon Christianity and power. Now, although scholars debate very much its precise location, well, that association reveals something crucial. See, long before this town's establishment as a really important port, it already had an important place in the landscape. Dunwich grew into one of England's major ports, trading across the North Sea with Scandinavia and the Low Countries. Recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086, Dunwich already had multiple churches and a sustainable population. Over the following centuries, it expanded further, developing a busy harbour, religious houses, defensive structures, and even representation in Parliament. But change was around the corner. 13th and 14th century, churches that once anchored parishes lay offshore, their bells said to be heard beneath the waves. In later folklore, Dunwich continued to return members of Parliament despite having only a handful of inhabitants, becoming one of Britain's rotten boroughs. Archaeology has shown that large parts of the town now lay beneath the sea, preserved and submerged ruins offshore. Its loss reminds us that places like this can disappear and vanish from the landscape because they're vulnerable to the very environment that shaped them in the first place.
Now, if you've been watching this channel for a little while, you'll know that one of my many obsessions is to find the lost Roman city of Vindomis. That city or town or whatever it happened to be is one of a few that were mentioned by the Romans that here in southern Britain we have yet to find.
In brief, the Romans had itineraries of routes. For Britain they had maybe 15 routes. For what purpose? Well, we don't completely know. Maybe tax collection, official business of some kind, whatever. The point is, a route could be from A to B via a number of places, all with a given mileage, and that's where the issue begins for us.
So one of those routes, one of those ITAs for Britain, number 15 XV, was a route between Silchester and Exeter. Now they list it as 136 miles. Each stopping place along the way has a set mileage between them. There's 7 stopping places, and you may be able to guess where this is going because guess what? One of those places, we don't know where it is. So you think it would be really simple. You just take the town before and the town after, and hey presto, all of a sudden in between, because we've worked out the mileage, we have the lost city of Vindomis. Right, let's go and warm up inside the church.
Sadly, this wasn't easy. This is the last land entry for Britain, ITA 15, and it was subject to rubbing and damage throughout, and of course that made transcription errors far more likely. In fact, the overall given mileage 136 miles, yet when you add them all up individually, well, it adds up to 126 miles. So we have Silchester to Vindomis stated 15 XV miles, and if we draw a circle around Silchester on that distance, then we take the following stop, Vindomis to Winchester, at a stated XXI 21 miles, then we have 2 potential locations.
Okay, so I travelled here. This is St Lawrence's Church in West Woodhay, sort of North Berkshire Downs. Now, we should potentially find the lost city of Vindomis just to the south of here. If we take those 2 circumferences around Silchester and Winchester, well, one of the points where they meet is just to the south of here, but we have no archaeological evidence, we have no LiDAR, and more importantly, we have no Roman roads of any form or capacity here in sight. Let's have a quick look in the church. Disappointingly, it's all locked up. What about the other point on those 2 circumferences where they meet? Well, that takes us near Alton, and we do have a Roman town there discovered a little while ago, Nepham. But we have a problem again there because the journey between Nepham and Winchester, well, it doesn't work because there are no Roman roads of any form or capacity in sight. This actually gets a lot more nuanced with this, with the mileage of different places and how they all add up, transcription errors, you name it. But the Roman Road Research Association have done a lot of work on this, and they believe the current location somewhere in the vicinity of the Wheatsheaf, a place sort of halfway between the 2, and they're suggesting that actually these were just big transcription errors over time. Makes sense. However, above all though, this shows us that it's easy to assume we've discovered everything we can in this small island. It's easy to think there is nothing left to find. The name Magnus Portus, the Great Harbour, comes to us from Ptolemy, a Greek geographer, writing in the 2nd century. Now he describes a world using a location of places, longitude and latitude points. No maps, but
coordinates, and a lot of them. Magnus Portus appears in a list for southern Britain.
Now what Ptolemy doesn't give us at any point is a great deal of certainty. He doesn't describe the harbour, the features, the place, just giving us a number of coordinates attached to all of these points, including this place. Now bear in mind, from that we do have a very distorted Scotland, but not only that, we also have a very distorted rest of Britain.
Over time, several candidates have been proposed, most often Portsmouth Harbour, sometimes Chichester Harbour, and occasionally Langstone Harbour. All are large, sheltered, natural inlets, and that oddly is the problem. We would expect inscriptions, place name continuity, or a clever textual trail tying the Roman name to the later town. Instead, what we find is ambiguity. Portsmouth emerged as a major port much later in the medieval period. Chichester, whilst important, already had a Roman name of its own, and Langstone, though geographically plausible, leaves no firm footprint, none that seem to work for a continued historical sense.
So unlike Vindomis, we're not missing a place, it's not a lost place. All of these potential places are still there. They're unmistakable, and in some cases they're still serving their purpose as a harbour and a port.
So at some point between Ptolemy's map and historical record, we have this gap where that place stopped attaching itself to the landscape.
So right now I'm walking along the banks and the ditches of a hill fort, and certainly from this view, well, it looks like many we see here in Wessex. A significant ditch there certainly, but this one does have a fundamental difference. So this is Old Sarum, and it's the earliest form of what would become Salisbury. We have commanding views all around us, we have routes from many different directions of all different eras, and we have a valley below us in that direction where 5 rivers converge.
Now when the Romans arrived here in southern Britain, Old Sarum didn't become a Roman town. There is no evidence of a Roman urban structure here, no forum, baths or street grid.
Now after Roman rule, well, this place slowly began to gain its prominence in the landscape once again. We have a Saxon stronghold in the early medieval, and then come the 11th century, well, we have a re-emergence again by the Normans. And with that, a royal castle was built right there in the centre, with this moat around the outside, defences, and then right here we have a cathedral. Now this made Old Sarum a concentration of unusualness. We have military, we have administration, and of course we have religion.
For roughly 2 centuries, this hilltop functioned as a centre of a diocese, an important royal site hosting councils and serving as a focal point for authority.
The hilltop was never an easy place to live. We have contemporary records describing tensions between the clergy and the garrison, and we have complaints about the wind, the rain, the exposure, the lack of space, and of course the lack of water.
By the late 12th century, the cathedral community was actively seeking permission to relocate. Royal consent was granted, papal approval followed, and in 1220 work began on a new cathedral site beside the River Avon.
You see, this place here, this city, well, it wasn't lost in any of the ways that we've seen today. It was systematically emptied, it was done by design. What we saw there became perhaps a much more efficient city down in the valley there.
Despite having few or no residents, it continued to return members of Parliament for centuries, becoming again one of Britain's most infamous so-called rotten boroughs. Representation survived long after the settlement did, finally ending with the Reform Act of 1832. Not every place we see is lost in the same way. Some are worn away by the time of tide, some are emptied as lives and livelihoods move on, some linger only as names on old lists, while others are deliberately left behind in favour of something new. What connects them all though is change, the steady human process by which the landscape is worked and reworked and history moves on. I've been Paul. If you've enjoyed this week's video, well, hopefully you'll enjoy some of the others we've done. We've got a back catalogue of nearly over 300 or so. And if you've really enjoyed this channel and you want to help contribute towards its running costs, we have a YouTube members section and a Patreon where you can chip in with ideas, you can see some behind the scenes bits and pieces, all sorts going on. Either way, we'll see you this time next week.